In the chaotic aftermath of World War I, while the world struggled to rebuild, a man named Charles Ponzi arrived in America with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. What he didn't have in wealth, he made up for in ambition. And in just a few years, he would become one of the most notorious figures in financial history by promising the impossible and delivering, well, at least for a while. But how did a broke immigrant manage to fool thousands of people and even the banks with a scheme so bold it gave birth to the term Ponzi Scheme? Let's rewind the clock and uncover the incredible story of Charles Ponzi. From Italy to America, the birth of a hustler. Charles Ponzi was born in 1882 in Lugo, Italy, into a family that had once been well off but had long since lost its wealth. Despite attending the University of Rome La Sapienza, Charles didn't take his studies very seriously. He was more interested in living the high life than hitting the books. In 1903, at the age of 21, Ponzi decided to pursue the American dream. He set sail for Boston with just $2.50 in his pocket, after spending most of his money gambling on the boat. What followed was not the immediate success he had envisioned. Ponzi spent the next few years bouncing from job to job, dishwasher, waiter, clerk, anything to stay afloat. But Charles had bigger plans. He didn't just want to make a living. He wanted to be rich, exceptionally rich. And he believed he was destined for it. The scam before the scam. Before Ponzi hit it big, he had already dabbled in shady business. After failing to find fortune in the U.S., he moved to Canada and began working at a bank in Montreal called Banco Zarossi, which catered to Italian immigrants. The bank promised unusually high interest rates. Sound familiar? When the bank collapsed in 1908 due to bad loans and fraud, Ponzi forged a check from a former client in a desperate attempt to get money. He was caught, sentenced to prison for 3 years, and later deported from Canada. But prison didn't break him. In fact, it refined his skills. While behind bars, he met seasoned con artists who taught him how to think bigger. When he got out, Ponzi was no longer just a man chasing dreams. He was a man chasing loopholes. The Spark, a postcard and a big idea. In 1919, Ponzi stumbled upon something seemingly insignificant, an international reply coupon, or IRC. These were postal vouchers that allowed someone in one country to prepay the postage for a reply from someone in another. With post-war inflation wrecking currency values across Europe, Ponzi realized he could buy IRCs cheaply in countries like Italy or Spain and redeem them for U.S. postage stamps, which were worth more. It was a clever idea. On paper, it looked like risk-free arbitrage. Buy low in Europe, redeem high in America, profit endlessly. Now here's the twist. The math did work, in theory. If executed perfectly, the returns could be huge. But in practice, the logistics of buying, shipping, and redeeming millions of IRCs were nearly impossible. That didn't stop Ponzi from running with it. The beginning of the scheme. In January 1920, Charles Ponzi founded the Securities Exchange Company in Boston. He told investors he had developed a revolutionary trading strategy involving IRCs. He promised them a 50% return on investment in 45 days, or double their money in 90 days, and people bought in, eagerly. At first, Ponzi actually paid the promised returns. Early investors received their money back with huge profits. Word spread like wildfire. Thousands of people rushed to invest, handing over their life savings, convinced that Ponzi had unlocked the secret to unimaginable wealth. But here's the secret. Ponzi wasn't making money from IRCs. In fact, he barely traded them at all. He was using money from new investors to pay the old ones. A classic case of robbing Peter to pay Paul. And it worked, at least for a while. The rise. A king of finance is born. By the spring of 1920, Charles Ponzi had gone from rags to riches. In just a few months, he was making millions. He bought a mansion in Lexington, Massachusetts, complete with air conditioning and a heated pool. luxuries unheard of at the time. He drove around in a custom limousine, wore the finest suits, and even hired a press agent to manage his public image. The newspapers couldn't get enough of him. Some hailed him as a financial genius. Others were more skeptical, but the crowds didn't care. People were lining up outside his office, desperate to invest. In just 6 months, Ponzi raked in an estimated $15 million, roughly $200 million today. That kind of money made him a star. He was the man who beat the system, the immigrant who outsmarted Wall Street. Or so it seemed. The cracks begin to show, but no empire built on lies can stand forever. In July 1920, the Boston Post started investigating Ponzi. The newspaper hired a financial journalist named Clarence Barron, who also happened to be the owner of Dow Jones and Company, to dig deeper. Barron quickly realized that Ponzi's story didn't add up. The number of IRCs needed to sustain his scheme was astronomical, millions more than were actually in circulation worldwide. On top of that, federal agents found that Ponzi hadn't been investing in IRCs at all. But Ponzi didn't flinch. When reporters asked for interviews, he smiled. He even sued the Boston Post for libel, trying to buy more time and public sympathy. It worked, briefly. But behind the scenes, the house of cards was collapsing. Banks began to call in their loans. The government opened an investigation. And worst of all, investors started to panic. The fall of Charles Ponzi. In August 1920, the authorities finally raided Ponzi's offices. What they found confirmed the worst fears. Ponzi had liabilities far greater than his assets. He owed about $7 million, but had less than $1 million on hand. The truth was out. Charles Ponzi had orchestrated one of the most elaborate financial frauds in American history. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of mail fraud. In total, he served over 14 years in prison, first in federal prison, then later in state prison for related charges. He lost everything: his fortune, his reputation, and his freedom. His wife left him. His name became synonymous with fraud. And when he was finally released from prison in 1934, he was deported back to Italy, where he lived in obscurity. The final years, and a forgotten man. Ponzi's final years were marked by poverty and illness. After struggling to find work in Mussolini's Italy, he eventually moved to Brazil, where he took a job as an airline manager, a job he quickly lost after being accused of further financial mismanagement. He lived the remainder of his life in a charity hospital in Rio de Janeiro. Blind in one eye and partially paralyzed, Ponzi spent his final days reflecting on the life he had lived. He died in 1949 at the age of 66, penniless and forgotten. But his legacy? That was just beginning. The legacy of a liar. Today, Charles Ponzi's name lives on in infamy. Ponzi scheme has become the universal term for any financial scam that pays returns to early investors using the capital of new ones, without any real profit being generated. From Bernie Madoff's $65 billion fraud to countless smaller scams around the world, the same pattern keeps repeating: the promise of easy money, the illusion of genius, the collapse that always comes. Ponzi didn't invent the concept. Similar schemes existed even in the 1800s, but he perfected it. He sold it better than anyone before him. He wrapped it in charm, confidence, and just enough plausible math to fool even the sharpest minds of his time. And that's what makes his story so dangerous and so unforgettable. Why people still fall for it. You might wonder, how could anyone fall for such an obvious scam? But Ponzi's story isn't about numbers. It's about hope. People wanted to believe. They were living through economic uncertainty, recovering from war, and searching for something, anything, that could offer stability. Ponzi gave them that, not with logic, but with emotion. He promised more than just money. He promised dreams. And that's why people lined up with their savings. That's why, even today, Ponzi schemes continue to flourish. Because as long as there's fear and greed, there will be someone ready to take advantage of both. The cautionary tale. Charles Ponzi's story is a warning, a reminder that if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. But it's also a fascinating chapter in financial history, a story of ambition, charisma, and deception, of how one man fooled the world, not with guns or armies, but with promises. So the next time you hear about a guaranteed return or a risk-free investment, think of Charles Ponzi. And remember, the most dangerous lies are the ones we want to believe.